Okay, hello. Now we're going to take a look at our unit on industry in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and we're going to focus here for our starting work on child labor in America. And we're going to do this by examining several photographs of children in the workplace in the early 1900s. So in 1908, our photographer here, Lewis Hine, became the photographer for the National Child Labor Committee, the NCLC, leaving his teaching position. Over the next decade, he documented child labor to help the NCLC's efforts to end child labor. In 1913, he documented child laborers among cotton mill workers to show the public just how dangerous these child's lives were. As a photographer, he was frequently threatened with violence or even death by factory police and foremen. At the time, the dangers and injuries of child labor was meant to be hidden from the public. Photography was not only prohibited, but also posed a very serious threat to the industry. To gain entry to the mills, mines, and factories, Lewis was forced to use many disguises. At times, he pretended to be a fire inspector, a postcard vendor, a Bible salesman, or even an industrial photographer making a record of factory machinery. The work of Lewis Hine and others put an end to the mistreatment of child laborers in the mills. Lewis Hine's photographs supported the NCLC's work to end child labor, and in 1912, the Children's Bureau was created. The Fair Labor Standards of 1938 eventually brought child labor in the U.S. to an end. He was one of those photographic investigators. In many instances, he simply tricked his way into the factories to take pictures that the factory managers didn't want the public to see. He was careful to document every photograph with precise facts and figures. To obtain captions for his pictures, he interviewed the children and then scribbled notes with his hand hidden inside his pocket. Because of how he got access, he was double sure that my photo data was 100% pure, no retouching or fakery of any kind. The industrial boom of the late 1800s and early 1900s caused an increased demand for labor. Factory wages were so low that children often worked to help support their families. The number of children under the age of 15 who worked in industrial jobs climbed from 1.5 million in 1890 to 2 million in 1910. Businesses liked to hire children because they worked in unskilled jobs for lower wages than adults, and their small hands made them more adept at handling small parts and tools. These underage workers rarely attended school. Many were underweight, suffered stunted growth and curvature of the spine, and began to develop serious health problems. They developed diseases related to their work environment, such as tuberculosis and bronchitis for those who worked in coal mines or cotton mills. And they faced high accident rates due to fatigue caused by hard work and long hours. Now, as far as wages at this time, men were paid the highest wage because they were seen as breadwinners for the family. Women were automatically paid half as much as a man, and they could work the same amount of hours as men, but their wages were half as much as men. Children were paid even less than that. If you look at the number of hours worked, their wages, etc., that children got, the children are working literally for pennies an hour. By the early 1900s, many Americans were simply calling child labor child slavery and were demanding an end to it. In 1904, a group of progressive reformers founded the NCLC and received a charter from Congress in 1907. It hired investigators to gather evidence of children working in harsh conditions to try to abolish child labor. By 1910, children made up 18.4% of the total labor workforce. That is nearly 20%. Louis Hine, a New York City schoolteacher and photographer, believed that a picture could tell a powerful story. In 1908, he quit teaching and became an investigative photographer for the NCLC. He traveled the country taking pictures of children working in all types of industries. Coal mines, meatpacking houses, textile mills, canneries, in the streets selling newspapers and other places. So now what I want to do is take you on a little journey here and look at a series of photographs by Louis Hine. What I want you to do is, in your head, I want you first of all to use the idea of that thinking routine: see, think, wonder. What do you see? What do you think? What's it make you wonder about the children in the photographs? And then I want you to think about your five senses. What do you see in this photograph? What sounds could you imagine hearing? Touch. What are you going to feel? Smell. What does it smell like in these places with poor ventilation, poor lighting? And in taste, could you just taste something in the air in these places? So, see, think, wonder, five senses as you examine these photographs. And then just make some mental notes of these photographs as we work on the two worksheets later to get, some written documentation down for what you're seeing here with the photographs. So this young girl here is one of the spinners in Whitnall Cotton Mill. She was 51 inches high, so she's barely over. She's 4'3". She's been in the mill a year. Sometimes she works at night. She runs 4 sides, 48 cents a day. When asked how old she was, she hesitated. I don't remember. Then confidentially, I'm not old enough to work, but I do just the same. Out of 50 employees, 10 children were about her size. Now, also, as you look at these photographs of these children, look at the potential for damage to their fingers, to their hands, to their arms, their feet, their hair, their clothing getting caught. Okay, so think about all those things. What do you see going on in these photographs? Okay, here's a young boy making baskets in a basket factory. And remember, this is going to be for upwards of 10 plus hours a day, at least 6 days a week. Here's a photograph of newsboys and newsgirls getting ready to go out in the afternoon to sell their newspapers. Here is Johnny Yellow, a young Polish berry picker at Bottomley Farm. He says he's 10 years old and has gone to Biloxi, Mississippi for 9 years with his family and has worked there in the winter and here in the summer for 3 years. He is stunted, being only 39 inches high. So he's 3 foot 3 inches and he's 10 years old. Mrs. Battaglia, Tessie, age 12. Tony, age 7. 170 Mulberry Street, rear house, 5th floor. Garment workers. Husband is crippled by a fall, tends to basement. Mrs. Battaglia works in the shop except for Saturdays when the children sew with her at home. They get 2 or 3 cents a pair for finishing men's pants. Said they earn $1 to $1.50 on Saturdays. Father is disabled and can earn very little. Here's a boy saying he's 15 years old and he's working even late into the evening, as late as 11 o'clock at night, shining shoes. This is 9 p.m. at night in an Indiana glassworks factory. So look at what's going on. The lighting is going to be very minimal. Ventilation, not a lot. So just the noise of everything going on, the heat, the smells, etc. So again, see, think, wonder. Make those mental notes. Okay, this is a young driver in a coal mine. He's been driving for a year. 7 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. daily. He probably works 7 days a week. Here's a girl at a weaving machine, and these are warpers. And so look at the potential for damage here. She could easily get her finger caught in that. She could get her apron or her sleeve caught if she didn't have her hair tied up. Depending upon where she was, she could even risk having that injured. So keep in mind, look at what they're doing, the possibility for dangers. Okay, here's Rosie, an 8-year-old oyster shucker, working from 3 a.m. until 5 p.m. 14 hours a day, and she's 8 years old, working with a very sharp knife to force open these shells. And she said that the baby of the family will start shucking as soon as she can hold the knife. There's another one, 4-year-old Mary, shucking oysters. Tends to the baby when not working. The boss said the next year Mary will work steadily as the rest of them. So by the time she's 5 years old, boom, she's right there with everybody else. The mother is the fastest shucker in the place. She earns $1.50 a day and works part of the time with her sick baby in her arms. Father is at work on the docks. Look at this little guy here just looking out the window. At the time of the 1900 census, 1 in 6 children between the ages of 5 and 10 participated in the workforce. In fact, at the time, child labor, like I said earlier, made up 20% of the entire workforce. Most were out of school and illiterate because their parents had no choice but to send them to work so that they could help support the families. In 1900, around 1 million people were injured while working in a factory, many of them children. If you were injured on the job, it's your fault. There was no medical care, there was no OSHA, none of that stuff. Workman's comp, no. So this kid here already, he's probably 8 or 9 years old. He's already lost his whole arm. In fact, 50% of child labor conditions included hazardous work. Hands were mangled, fingers lost in fast-moving machinery. Exhausted kids who nodded off sometimes fell into the machinery, and those confined to tight spaces died in explosions, cave-ins, and fires. Living conditions. If New York City child laborers were lucky, they worked in new law tenements, which operated in full compliance with lighting and ventilation laws. More often, though, these children and their families, usually immigrants, lived in dilapidated, overcrowded, and barely livable tenements. This is also the time of a big wave of immigration into the United States, where they're seeing almost an average of 1 million immigrants a year, the bulk of them coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. In some of Lower Manhattan's tenement houses, children made artificial flowers in makeshift factories. Some families made up to $20 a week. But that meant children worked until 8 o'clock at night, making as many as 1,700 flowers per day. And then, if they were lucky, attend school the next day. Often parents kept their children at home, forced them to do garment work like sewing buttons on trousers, which sometimes paid as little as 6 cents a piece. Forcing very young children to stay home from school violated the law, but once a child passed the age of 14, truant officers could not enforce compulsory education laws. Now we're going to look at some coal mining pictures. Look at these boys in this picture. Many of them 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. They worked in the coal mines here. This one is in Pennsylvania, where they separated coal from slate by hand. And if they got cut, got infected, that's on them. Okay? And asthma and black lung were common among these breaker boys. Many had lost limbs by being caught in machinery, or some had even been crushed to death by mounds of coal or under the conveyor belts that they worked near. And if a child died, no big deal, just go get another kid off the street. That's how cheap child labor was. Here's some more breaker boys. Eventually, new technology and water separators made the breaker boys obsolete. Mandatory education laws and stricter enforcement of child labor laws brought about by these photographs helped end this practice by 1920. Here's some other coal miners. So just look at their faces. These are kids 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. And they're starting to look like old men. They're getting diseases that old men would get. Elsewhere, children working in cotton mills, like this one in North Carolina, were often orphans. The mills employed these children in exchange for shelter, food, and water. So look at this photograph and look at the potential for harm in this photograph. Big machinery, long sleeves, aprons, hem of a dress, long hair, hands, fingers, arms, etc. In the mills, children as young as 5 and 6 years old worked 10-hour days, 6 days a week without breaks. What's more, scraps of cotton filled the air, causing frequent cases of lung disease. So there's no ventilation, lighting, etc. in these places. Here's another girl working as a doffer, replacing spools in the spinning machine and risking falling into this machine. For their trouble, some of these child laborers in the mills could earn 40 cents a day. If you're working 10 hours a day, your wage, you're working for 4 cents an hour. Day in, day out. During this period, factories were not heated or air conditioned and lacked sufficient ventilation and lighting. Pay was no better. All right? Mothers often brought their children to factories because they lacked basic child care options. Even though children did not receive a permit to work in the canneries until the age of 14, the younger ones could help shuck, but would sometimes have to hide if an investigator came to inspect the factory conditions. Here's some more breaker boys in Pennsylvania, 1911. Here's some more breaker boys in another town in Pennsylvania. Look at this boy here. He's taking a break from digging coal on the snowy roadside in Scotts Run, West Virginia. The photographer noted that the child was barefoot and he seemed to be used to it. A kid could easily get frostbite and lose toes. There's another girl working as a warper on weaving machines. Here's some boys working in an arcade bowling alley in 1909. This photo was taken late at night. The boys work until midnight or even later. And then they go home, sleep, maybe eat something, and back at it again the next day. Here's a spinner in a cotton mill. The overseer admitted that she was regularly employed there. This little girl's probably no more than 5 or 6 years old. This is Stanislaus Laveris. He's working in a spinning room. He's been doing this job for 2 years. Luckily, he still has all his fingers and limbs. This is Furman Owens. He's 12 years old. He can't read. He doesn't know his ABCs. Yet he wants to learn, but he can't because he's working all the time. He's been in the mill for 4 years. There's a little salesman in business for himself. Fruit and vegetable stand. And then our last photograph here, a Bowery boot black in New York City, shining shoes. Okay, so I hope these photographs kind of gave you a glimpse into history. This is the fun part of history when we get to deal with actual documents, etc. These documents now all happen to be photographs, and they give us a glimpse into what was going on at this time. So, thank you very much.